I was stopped at the red light on Wilshire Boulevard, drumming my fingers on the steering wheel and watching pedestrians cross, when I heard the first scream. Sharp, panicked, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. At first I thought someone had been hit. LA drivers don't always slow for crosswalks. But then more voices joined in, a chorus of terror that cut through the hum of idling engines in afternoon traffic. I craned my neck and saw something that made my blood freeze. An elderly woman stood frozen in the middle of the crosswalk, her cane raised halfway, as if she'd forgotten how to move. She wore a floral dress and cream cardigan, completely out of place against the concrete and exhaust fumes. But it wasn't her that made people scream. It was the Pitbull, massive, muscular. 70 pounds of coiled power straining against a harness, jaws open, body lunging forward toward the traffic. The leash in the old woman's hand looked like a thread trying to hold back a freight train. "Oh my God, that dog's going to attack!" someone shrieked from the sidewalk. A silver Honda SUV in the right lane didn't stop. The driver was looking down, texting, distracted, oblivious. The vehicle drifted toward the crosswalk, engine roaring, closing the distance between chrome and fragile human bone. The pit bull surged forward. Phones appeared like a coordinated reflex. Someone screamed for the police. A man in a business suit yanked his young daughter backward so hard she stumbled. The woman beside me locked her car doors with an audible click. The old woman didn't move, didn't cry out. She just stood there, one trembling hand gripping the leash, the other white-knuckled on her cane, as 70 pounds of muscle and teeth launched itself between her and 2 tons of steel. I threw my car into park and bolted from the driver's seat, leaving the door hanging open, my own heart hammering against my ribs. Tires shrieked, horns blared in a deafening symphony of chaos. The pit bull's body tensed, haunches coiled, but something was wrong with the picture everyone else was seeing. The dog wasn't attacking. He was shaking. His massive head swung left and right, ears pinned flat, eyes wide and white-rimmed. His mouth was open, yes, but his lips weren't curled back in aggression. They were pulled tight in something closer to terror. The harness bit into his chest as he positioned himself directly in the path of the oncoming vehicle. A living barrier of fur and muscle and fear. "Get back! Get that animal away from her!" A man's voice, harsh and commanding, cut through the noise. But the old woman wasn't trying to pull the dog back. She was leaning forward, her lips moving, whispering something I couldn't hear over the chaos. Her hand reached out, not to yank the leash, but to touch the pit bull's trembling flank. The Honda swerved at the last second. The driver finally looked up, eyes huge, and slammed the brakes. Rubber screamed against asphalt. The SUV fishtailed, rear end sliding sideways, missing the woman by inches but clipping the curb hard enough to blow the front tire with a sound like a gunshot. The pit bull flinched violently at the noise, his whole body jerking, but he didn't run. He pressed closer to the old woman, his massive frame creating a shield between her and the now stopped vehicle. A crowd formed instantly. Drivers abandoned their cars. People poured out of the coffee shop on the corner, phones raised recording. I heard fragments of shouted commentary. "Someone call 911. That dog is dangerous. She shouldn't have an animal like that. Where's animal control?" I pushed through the gathering mob, holding up both hands. "Everyone stay back. Give them space." But space was the last thing they wanted to give. A woman in yoga pants brandished her phone like a weapon, recording from 6 feet away. A delivery driver stood with his hand hovering near his waistband. and I couldn't tell if he was reaching for a phone or something worse. The old woman finally looked up. Her face was paper white, mapped with deep lines, her eyes magnified behind thick glasses. She looked about 90, maybe older, too old to be standing in the middle of a Los Angeles street with traffic bearing down and a crowd turning hostile. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible. "Please, he wouldn't. Ma'am, you need to control that animal." A man in a security uniform from the nearby office building stepped forward, his voice dripping with authority and zero empathy. The Pitbull's ears flattened further, his body language shifted, still protective, but now wary of the humans closing in. I'd seen dogs react to crowds before, and this one was seconds away from a fight-or-flight response. Except flight wasn't an option with a 90-year-old woman holding his leash. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "Everyone, back up!" I shouted again, my voice cracking with urgency. "You're making this worse!" A black and white LAPD cruiser screeched to a stop at the intersection, lights flashing, siren dying with a final whoop. An officer emerged, hand on his belt, eyes scanning the scene with trained precision. He was older, maybe 50, with the kind of weathered face that had seen everything twice. "LAPD, everyone step back from the animal." His voice had the weight of decades of command. The Pitbull's body went rigid, his eyes locked on the uniform, the badge, the authority figure barking orders, and something primal flickered across his face. His lips finally did curl back, just slightly, a warning that had nothing to do with the traffic and everything to do with the man in blue. The old woman's knees buckled. She grabbed the dog's harness with her free hand, not to control him, but to keep herself upright. "No, no, no," she whispered. "Not again. Please, not again." I was close enough now to see the scars, thick, ropey lines across the Pitbull's chest and shoulders, half hidden by his dark coat. Old wounds, healed but never forgotten, and his front leg, the way it trembled under his weight, not from fear, but from pain. "Officer, wait," I started, but my voice was lost in the growing chaos. A black sedan, 2 cars back, revved its engine, impatient, angry. The driver leaned on the horn, a long, aggressive blast that shattered the momentary stillness. The Pitbull's head snapped toward the sound. His whole body coiled, every muscle screaming flight, but his paws stayed planted. He looked back at the old woman, then at the officer, then at the honking car. Trapped in a nightmare of noise and movement and looming threats. The old woman lost her grip on the cane. It clattered to the asphalt. She swayed, her hands still tangled in the leash, and I saw her lips form a single word. "Blaze." The Pitbull's eyes found hers, amber and brown, locked in communication that needed no language. And in that second, I realized something the crowd hadn't. This wasn't a woman losing control of a dangerous animal. This was a guardian refusing to abandon the person he loved, even if it killed him. The officer's radio crackled. "Unit 7, Adam 23, what's your status?" "We've got a situation with an aggressive pit bull and an elderly woman in the crosswalk at Wilshire, and..." "He's not aggressive." A new voice cut through the tension. A woman in her 40s pushed through the crowd, business suit rumpled, heels clicking urgently on the pavement. Her face was flushed, eyes wide with recognition. She looked at the old woman, then at the pit bull, then back again, and her expression shifted from alarm to something closer to awe. "Julia," she said, her voice trembling. "Julia Huggins?" The old woman's head turned slowly, as if moving through water. Her eyes were unfocused, glassy with shock, but something flickered when she saw the newcomer's face. "Christina?" Her voice was a ghost of itself. The woman, Christina, nodded, tears already forming. "It's me. From the center. From—" She looked at the Pitbull, really looked at him, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, that's Blaze. That's really him." The officer's hand hovered near his weapon. "Ma'am, do you know these individuals?" Christina turned to him, her professional composure cracking. Yes, yes, I do. And you need to understand something before this goes any further." She took a shaky breath. "That dog isn't the threat here. He never was." The officer's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and—" "He was a fighting dog." Christina's voice cut through his words like a blade. "Seized from an illegal ring 6 years ago. He was trained to respond to threats with violence, conditioned to attack anyone in uniform, anyone who raises their voice, anyone who makes sudden movements." The crowd gasped. Someone muttered, "I knew it." "But he's not attacking," Christina continued, her voice rising over the murmurs. "Look at him. Really look. He's terrified, and he's choosing not to hurt anyone. Do you understand what that means? What does that take?" The officer looked at the Pitbull, really looked, at the trembling legs, the pinned ears, the way his massive body curved protectively around the frail old woman who could barely stand. "Who is she?" the officer asked quietly. "To the dog?" Christina's eyes filled. "She's the woman who saved him, the woman who testified against the ring even after they threatened her, the woman who took him home when no one else would touch him." She paused, her voice breaking. "The woman who taught him that love is stronger than fear." A stunned silence fell over the intersection. Even the traffic seemed to hold its breath. The officer slowly, carefully, took his hand away from his belt. He crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Ma'am," he said gently, addressing Julia. "Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm Officer Beeler. I'm not going to hurt you or your dog. But I need you to help me understand what's happening here." Julia blinked, her eyes clearing slightly. She looked down at Blaze, at his scarred shoulders and trembling legs, at the way he leaned his full weight against her to keep her upright. Her wrinkled hand came up to rest on his head, fingers gentle in the short fur between his ears. "He's dying," she said simply. "The vet said maybe 3 months. Cancer in his bones. I brought him out because—" Her voice cracked. "Because he still loves the sun. Because he deserves to feel normal. Just once more." Officer Beeler's jaw tightened. He stood slowly, turning to face the crowd of spectators still filming, still watching, still judging. "Put the phones down," he ordered. "This isn't a show." I finally found my voice. "What do you need, officer? How can I help?" He glanced at me, assessing, then nodded. "Help me get them somewhere safe, away from the traffic, away from—" He gestured at the gawking crowd. "Away from this." Together we guided Julia and Blaze toward the sidewalk. The Pitbull moved slowly, favoring his front leg, his body still locked in protective mode. Julia's hand never left his harness. Christina walked on her other side, one hand hovering near Julia's elbow in case she fell. As we reached the curb, Julia's knees gave out completely. She sank onto the concrete, her back against a streetlight pole, and Blaze immediately lay down beside her, his head in her lap. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed, the terror drained from his body, replaced by exhaustion and trust. Julia's tears came then, silent and unstoppable, tracking down her weathered cheeks as she stroked the dog who had just chosen her life over his own instincts. Officer Beeler crouched beside them, his professional mask slipping just enough to show the human underneath. "Mrs. Huggins, I need to ask you some questions, but first I need to know, how did you two end up here? How did this all begin?" Julia wiped her eyes with a shaking hand. She looked at Christina, who nodded encouragement. She looked at me, a stranger who'd run into traffic without knowing why. She looked at the officer who'd arrived ready for violence and stayed for truth. And then, with her hand buried in the fur of the dog who'd saved her, Julia Huggins began to tell a story that started not with fear, but with something far more powerful. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit the subscribe button and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Time stretched like taffy in that moment on the sidewalk. Everything slowed. The traffic noise became a distant hum. The crowd's voices blurred into white noise, and all I could focus on was the trembling mass of muscle and scars pressed against Julia Huggins's frail legs. Blaze wasn't standing in triumph. He was barely standing at all. His haunches quivered with the effort of holding himself upright. The kind of full-body tremor you see in earthquake footage when buildings shake themselves apart from the inside out. His mouth hung open, tongue lolling, but his breathing came in short, desperate gasps, hyperventilating, panicking, drowning in open air. "It's okay, baby," Julia whispered, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. "It's okay. You're okay. I'm here." She repeated it like a mantra, each word precisely spaced, rhythmic, hypnotic. Her wrinkled hand moved in slow circles on his flank, just behind his shoulder, where the worst of the scarring twisted the fur into raised ridges. She wasn't trying to calm him for the crowd's benefit. This was muscle memory, years of practice in crisis management. But the crowd didn't understand muscle memory or trauma responses or the language of fear. "Lady, you need to get control of that dog." A man in a Mercedes had rolled down his window just enough to shout through the gap. His face was red, veins visible at his temples. "This is a public street. You can't just—" A horn blared from somewhere behind him, sharp, aggressive, impatient. Blaze flinched so violently he nearly went down. His legs buckled, front paw, the injured one, giving out completely for a split second before he caught himself. The movement tore a whimper from his throat, high-pitched and broken, and Julia's hand tightened on his harness. "Blaze," she said, louder now, more urgent. "Blaze, stay with me. Stay here." Jesus Christ, someone call animal control. A woman in yoga pants had her phone out, but not to record, to dial. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "That thing is a menace. It attacked that car." "He didn't attack anything," I said, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. "He was protecting her." "Protecting?" The yoga woman looked at me like I'd suggested the sun rose in the west. "Are you blind? Look at the size of him. Look at his jaw." Another car horn, then another. A symphony of impatience and anger as drivers realized the intersection wasn't clearing, that their afternoon commute was being held hostage by an old woman and her dog. Each blast hit Blaze like a physical blow. His ears pinned so flat against his skull, they almost disappeared. His eyes went wide, whites showing all around the amber irises. Prey eyes, hunted eyes. Eyes that had seen things no living creature should ever witness. But he didn't run, didn't bolt, didn't do what every instinct must have been screaming at him to do. He pressed closer to Julia, his massive body curving around her like parentheses, trying to make himself both shield and shelter, despite the terror visibly coursing through him. "Someone's going to get hurt," a driver shouted from a black sedan. "That dog needs to be secured." "Call the police," another voice added. "I already did," Yoga Woman said, triumphant and terrified in equal measure. Julia's face drained of what little color it had. Her lips moved faster, the whispered reassurances becoming desperate. "No, no, Blaze, it's okay. They're not coming for you. Nobody's coming for you. I won't let them. I promise." But even I could hear the sirens now. Faint but unmistakable. That distinctive wail that meant authority was on its way. That official judgment was coming whether we wanted it or not. Blaze heard it too. His whole body went rigid, every muscle locking into place. The trembling stopped, not because the fear was gone, but because he'd moved past fear into something worse. Primal recognition, cellular memory of uniformed men in cages and violence dressed up as order. A car door opened in the line of traffic stuck behind the blown-tire Honda. A woman emerged, mid-40s, business suit wrinkled from a long day. Heels clicking urgently on the asphalt as she abandoned her vehicle and strode toward the scene. "Wait!" she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. "Everyone wait! Don't call anyone else!" The crowd turned toward her, annoyed at the interruption, ready to dismiss another interfering stranger. But she wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking at Blaze. Her eyes tracked across his body with the precision of someone reading a medical chart. The scars on his chest, the ropey tissue visible along his neck where the fur had never grown back properly, the way his front leg held at a slightly wrong angle even when he wasn't putting weight on it. Her hand came up to her mouth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "That's not... It can't be..." She moved closer, slowly, hands visible and empty. Not approaching Blaze directly, but circling to where she could see his face without making him feel cornered. Her eyes were wet. "The scars on his neck," she said to no one in particular, or maybe to herself. "The limp, the way he's positioning himself." She looked up at the hostile crowd, at the phones and the judgment and the fear. "You think he's being aggressive? You think he's the threat?" "Lady, we don't need another..." the Mercedes man started. "I'm a licensed social worker," Christina cut him off. "I spent 5 years working with animal rehabilitation cases. And I'm telling you right now, that dog isn't aggressive." She pointed at Blaze's pinned ears, his lowered head, the way his body curved inward despite his size. "That's a fear response. That's trauma. That's a living creature trying not to fall apart in the middle of a nightmare." The sirens grew louder, closer, maybe 2 blocks away now. Julia's breathing had gone shallow and rapid, matching Blaze's panicked rhythm. Her free hand groped for her cane, found nothing but air, settled instead on Blaze's scarred neck. "Please," she whispered, and I couldn't tell if she was talking to the dog, to God, or to the universe at large. "Please, not again. We've come so far. Please." Christina's eyes locked onto Julia's face, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition bloomed there, followed immediately by disbelief. "Julia," she said tentatively, taking another careful step closer. "Julia Huggins?" Julia's head snapped up. Her eyes, clouded with age and fear, struggled to focus on the newcomer's face. "Do I..." she started, her voice trembling. "Do I know you?" "Christina Vernon, from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center." Christina's voice cracked. "I was there the day they brought him in. I watched you. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't seem to reconcile the memory with the reality in front of her. The sirens crescendoed to a peak, then died abruptly. A police cruiser had arrived. Blaze's head turned toward the sound of car doors opening, of boots hitting pavement, of authoritative voices calling out commands. And in his eyes I saw something that made my blood run cold. Not aggression, not defiance, recognition. The kind of recognition that comes with scars. The police cruiser's arrival changed everything. What had been a scene of confused panic crystallized instantly into something uglier, into judgment, into certainty, into the kind of mob mentality that needs a villain and has already chosen one. Finally, the Mercedes man said, loud enough for everyone to hear, maybe now someone will do something about this situation. A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered spectators. Phone cameras adjusted their angles, zooming in, capturing every trembling muscle of the dog who'd somehow become the villain in a story he hadn't written. Pitbulls, a woman's voice cut through the crowd, sharp with righteous anger. They shouldn't be legal in the city. They're bred to kill. It's in their DNA. I read they can lock their jaws, someone else added. The statement delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never fact-checked anything in their life. Once they bite down, you can't get them off, not even with a crowbar. My cousin's neighbor had one that snapped one day. Just attacked a kid for no reason. Bit right through to the bone. The lies multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish, each person adding their own layer of hearsay and fear-mongering, building a narrative that had nothing to do with the shaking animal pressed against an elderly woman's legs. Julia was shrinking. I could see it happening in real time, her shoulders curving inward, her head bowing, her entire body trying to make itself smaller, less visible, less of a target. But it wasn't working. The crowd's attention had fixed on her with laser focus. She shouldn't be allowed to own a dog like that, Yoga Woman declared, her phone still pointed at the scene like a weapon. Not at her age. What was she thinking, bringing that thing out in public? Probably can't even control it, someone agreed. Look at her. She can barely stand up herself. They were talking about Julia like she wasn't there, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be addressed. Their voices grew louder, emboldened by each other's agreement, feeding on collective outrage. Someone could have died today. Someone still might. These people never think about anyone but themselves. Blaze's head swiveled toward the crowd. His ears, already pinned flat, seemed to disappear entirely into his skull. The trembling I'd seen before, the fear response to the traffic and the noise, shifted into something different. His muscles bunched differently now, his weight distribution changed, and I realized with a sick jolt that he wasn't reacting to the traffic anymore. He was reacting to the humans closing in around him. A driver in a pickup truck 3 cars back opened his door. I watched him lean down, reaching under the seat for something. When his hand came back up, it was wrapped around a tire iron. Just in case, he said to the person in the passenger seat, loud enough for others to hear. If that dog charges, I'm not going down without a fight. Christina Vernon stepped fully away from her abandoned car, leaving the door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. She moved with purpose, threading through the crowd with the kind of authority that made people step aside without quite knowing why. Everyone needs to back up, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. Right now, you're escalating this. Who the hell are you? Mercedes man demanded. Someone who actually knows what they're looking at. Christina didn't slow her approach. Unlike all of you who are about to cause exactly the tragedy you're so afraid of. She reached the inner circle where Julia sat hunched against the streetlight pole, where Blaze stood guard despite the terror rolling off him in waves. Christina crouched down slowly, making herself small, non-threatening, and when she spoke, her voice dropped to something gentler. "Julia Huggins," she said, and there was something in the way she said the name. Recognition mixed with awe, mixed with disbelief. "I can't believe it's really you." Julia's head lifted slightly. Her eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, struggled to focus on Christina's face. "You testified," Christina continued, her voice thick with emotion. "3 years ago. The Riverside Fighting Ring case. I read about it in the trade journals. They interviewed you for the Animal Welfare magazine." She gestured at Blaze, at his scars, at the way he stood despite everything telling him to run. "You're the woman who saved the evidence dogs, who took one home even after they threatened you." The crowd went silent. Not a supportive silence, a hungry one. The kind of silence that precedes a feeding frenzy. "Wait," Yoga Woman said slowly, her phone still recording. "She's the one who defended those fighting dogs? The vicious ones?" "They sent death threats to her house," someone else said, the words spreading like wildfire through the crowd. "I remember that story. They vandalized her property. The shelter said she was crazy for keeping one." "And she brought it here?" Mercedes Mann's voice rose in pitch. "To a public street? With all these people around?" The crowd pressed closer. Someone pointed. Someone else raised their voice. The circle tightened like a noose. Blaze's body went rigid. His lips pulled back just slightly. Not a snarl, not yet, but a warning, a plea. "Stay back. Please, just stay back." Julia's hand found his harness, gripped it with white-knuckled desperation. "Blaze," she whispered. "Blaze, no. Don't give them a reason. Please don't give them a reason." The sirens that had been faint background noise exploded into sharp, immediate reality. The police cruiser pulled up to the curb with a screech of tires, lights still flashing, painting everyone in alternating red and blue. Car doors opened. Boots hit pavement, and Blaze, surrounded by a hostile crowd and facing the arrival of uniformed authority, finally stopped shaking. Not because the fear was gone, because he'd moved past fear into something far more dangerous. The space between fight and flight, where a traumatized soul makes calculations about survival, about sacrifice, about which death is more bearable, his own, or the person he loves. Christina's hand shot out, not toward Blaze, but toward the officers emerging from the cruiser. "Don't approach yet," she called out, her voice cracking with urgency. "Please, just give me 1 minute. 1 minute before this goes somewhere none of us can come back from." The senior officer, name tag reading Beeler, paused, his hand hovering near his belt, his eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. The crowd, the dog, the elderly woman, the social worker on her knees begging for time. He looked at Blaze, really looked, and I saw the moment his training crashed headlong into his instinct. 30 seconds, he said quietly. "That's all I can give you." Christina turned back to Julia, her voice low and rapid. "Julia, I need you to tell me right now. Is that Blaze? Is that the dog from the Riverside case? The male they said was too far gone?" Julia nodded, tears streaming freely now. "They wanted to put him down," she whispered. "Everyone did. But I couldn't. I couldn't let them." "I know," Christina said. "I know. But right now I need you to help me save him one more time." The 30 seconds were already half gone, and the crowd, smelling blood in the water, pressed even closer. Officer Donald Beeler had the kind of face that told stories without saying a word. Mid-50s, maybe older, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth. The geography of 3 decades spent navigating LA's worst moments. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, his posture military straight, and when he moved, it was with the economical precision of someone who'd learned long ago not to waste motion. He'd seen everything. I could tell just by looking at him. Domestics that turned deadly, overdoses in alleys, accidents that weren't accidents, the kind of calls that showed up in officers' dreams for years afterward. But even he paused when he got a clear look at the scene. An elderly woman collapsed against a streetlight pole, tears streaming down her weathered face. A pit bull the size of a small bear standing over her, scarred and shaking, caught between protection and panic. A crowd of civilians pressing close with phones and opinions, and the barely restrained violence of people who'd decided they knew how this story ended. And Christina Vernon, a stranger in a wrinkled business suit, on her knees between all of it, like she was trying to hold back a tsunami with her bare hands. Beeler's partner, a younger officer with nervous energy written all over him, started to move forward. Beeler's hand shot out, stopping him without a word. "Ma'am," Beeler said, his voice carrying the weight of authority without shouting, "I'm going to need you to step away from the animal." It wasn't a request. It was the kind of statement that usually ended with immediate compliance, with civilians remembering that badges came with power, and power demanded respect. But Christina didn't move. "Officer, please," she said, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "I know what this looks like. I know what you're thinking. But I'm begging you, give me 2 minutes to explain before you make any decisions you can't take back." Beeler's eyes shifted to Blaze. The dog had gone absolutely still when the officer spoke, his entire body locked in a freeze response that somehow looked more dangerous than the shaking had been. Every muscle was visible beneath his scarred hide, coiled tight, ready. But ready for what? That was the question. Blaze's eyes, those haunted amber eyes, tracked Beeler's every micro movement. The shift of weight from one foot to the other, the slight adjustment of his hand near his belt, the unconscious squaring of shoulders that came with assuming authority. The dog wasn't looking at a person. He was looking at a uniform, at a badge, at a symbol that clearly meant something very specific in the broken filing cabinet of his trauma. "Ma'am, I understand you want to help," Beeler said, his tone gentler now, but no less firm. "But I've got a safety situation here. That animal is clearly distressed, and distressed animals are unpredictable. I need you to move back, and I need the dog's owner to secure him immediately." "I'm trying," Julia's voice came out barely above a whisper, cracking on the second word. "I'm trying, but he's scared, and I don't." She couldn't finish. Her hands shook so badly she could barely maintain her grip on Blaze's harness. 90 years of life, and she looked every day of it in that moment. Fragile, exhausted, defeated by the weight of a world that had never stopped being hostile. Beeler's expression softened fractionally. He'd seen this before too. Elderly residents in over their heads, situations spiraling beyond their control, pride preventing them from asking for help until it was too late. "Ma'am, when did you last have control of your dog?" he asked, his voice careful, clinical. Julia flinched at the question. It's not like that. Blaze doesn't." "She's had control the entire time," Christina interrupted, her voice sharp. The dog hasn't lunged at a single person, hasn't snapped, hasn't shown any aggressive behavior toward anyone here. What you're seeing isn't aggression, officer. It's fear. I'm trained to assess threatening animals, ma'am, Beeler replied, not unkindly. And right now, that dog's body language is telling me that he's been conditioned to see uniforms as a threat. Christina cut him off. That loud noises trigger him, that he's got fight or flight instincts that have been weaponized by people who turned him into a commodity. Beeler's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Christina took a shaking breath. His name is Blaze. He's an evidence dog from the Riverside County illegal fighting ring bust. 3 years ago, 17 dogs seized, most of them put down immediately because they were deemed too dangerous to rehabilitate. The words hit the crowd like a grenade. I heard gasps, curses, someone's phone hitting the pavement. Fighting dog? Yoga woman's voice climbed an octave. She brought a fighting dog into public? He was trained to kill, someone else added, panic spreading like contagion. Those dogs can't be saved. Everyone knows that. Beeler's hand moved closer to his belt. Not to his gun, not yet, but to his radio. Backup, animal control, the beginning of protocols that would end with Blaze in a cage or worse. Blaze saw the movement. His lips pulled back just enough to show teeth. Not a snarl, a warning, a desperate communication in the only language he had left. I see you. I know what comes next. I won't let you hurt her. Blaze, no, Julia whispered, her voice breaking. Baby, no, it's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to take you away. But even she didn't sound convinced. Officer Beeler, Christina said urgently, he was an evidence dog. Do you understand what that means? He testified. He helped put those people in prison. And Julia Huggins, she gestured at the trembling woman, she was the only person who would foster him, the only one willing to take the risk. She rebuilt him from nothing, taught him that not all humans are monsters, gave him 3 years of peace after a lifetime of hell. Beeler's jaw tightened. I saw him processing, weighing, calculating odds and outcomes. If he was deemed an evidence dog and not euthanized, there would be conditions, restrictions. Is he supposed to be in public spaces? Julia's silence was answer enough. Ma'am, did you violate the terms of your fostering agreement? Beeler asked. He's dying, Julia said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Cancer. Maybe 3 months left. I just wanted him to feel normal. Just once. Just everyone back. Now! Beeler's voice cracked like a whip, and the crowd stumbled backward. His eyes swept the scene. The phones, the tire iron still visible in the pickup driver's hand. The way civilians had formed a circle like they were watching a gladiator match. All of you, back to your vehicles. This is an active police scene. Anyone who doesn't comply will be cited for obstruction. The crowd hesitated, reluctant to give up their front row seats to tragedy. Then someone's car alarm went off, a silver sedan 3 rows back, its horn blaring in short, aggressive bursts. The owner fumbled with their key fob, swearing, trying to silence it. But the damage was done. The sound hit Blaze like a physical blow. His whole body jerked, muscles bunching, that terrible freeze response shattering into pure flight instinct. He spun toward the noise, toward the threat, his injured leg nearly giving out beneath him. And in the background, barely audible over the chaos, another engine revved, hard, aggressive. A black BMW 2 cars behind the alarm, its driver leaning on the accelerator in frustration, in rage, in the kind of impatience that didn't care about consequences. The engine roared like a predator's growl, and Blaze, trapped between the uniform in front of him and the mechanical violence behind him, had nowhere left to run, except toward the street, toward Julia, who'd somehow struggled to her feet without anyone noticing, toward the path of a car that was no longer stopped. The black BMW didn't just rev, it launched. The driver, fed up with the delay, with the drama, with the entire circus blocking his route home, slammed his foot down. The engine screamed. Tires spun, caught traction, and the vehicle shot forward like a bullet from a chamber, directly toward the gap where Julia had somehow, impossibly, gotten to her feet. She stood swaying in the space between the curb and the disabled Honda, her cane forgotten on the ground, both hands reaching toward Blaze. She'd risen on instinct, on muscle memory, trying to comfort the dog who was seconds from bolting into traffic or worse. She didn't see the BMW coming, didn't hear it over the car alarm still blaring, didn't understand that she'd positioned herself in the exact wrong place at the exact wrong moment. But Blaze saw. Time fractured. The world became a series of still images, each one burning itself into my memory with photographic precision. The BMW's chrome grille reflects afternoon sunlight, Julia's floral dress fluttering in the breeze created by the approaching vehicle. Officer Beeler's hand moving toward his radio, his mouth opening to shout a warning that would arrive too late. Christina's scream cutting through the chaos. Julia! A sound that would echo in my nightmares for years. And Blaze. Blaze, whose entire body had been coiled for flight, whose every instinct screamed at him to run from the noise, from the uniform, from the crowd that wanted him dead. Blaze, whose amber eyes had been locked on escape routes and survival. Blaze turned his head and looked at Julia. Their eyes met. For one suspended heartbeat, the world stopped spinning. The cage. Metal bars pressing in from all sides, too small to stand, too small to turn around. The smell of rust and fear and death. Blood crusted on concrete floors. Sounds that weren't quite barks, weren't quite screams. The sounds animals make when they've learned that no one is coming to help. Then, a voice, soft, steady, different from all the others. Hey there, sweet boy. Hey, nobody's going to hurt you. Not anymore. Not ever again. Hands, gentle hands that didn't hit or grab or hurt. Hands that offered food, water, kindness that felt like a trap but wasn't, couldn't be, because nothing that felt this way could be a lie. That's it. That's my good boy. That's my Blaze. You're safe now. You're safe with me. The memory flashed through Blaze's eyes in the space between seconds. I saw it happen. The shift from animal to something more. From instinct to choice. From survival to sacrifice. He lunged, not forward toward freedom, not backward toward safety, sideways. His powerful haunches coiled and released, propelling 70 pounds of muscle and bone and fierce, desperate love directly into Julia's side. Not attacking, not biting, shoving, like a linebacker taking down a quarterback, his shoulder connecting with her hip with enough force to lift her clean off her feet. Julia's scream cut off as the air left her lungs. Her body flew sideways, arms windmilling, glasses knocked askew, handbag flying off her shoulder in a wide arc. She cleared the path by inches. The BMW hit Blaze instead. The sound was worse than anything I'd ever heard. Not a clean impact. Nothing about it was clean. Metal meeting flesh and bone with a crunch that seemed to compress all the air out of the world. The vehicle's bumper caught Blaze's hindquarters as he twisted, still trying to push Julia further away, even as the impact began. His body tumbled. Not a graceful roll, a violent ragdoll spin. Once, twice, slamming against the asphalt with sounds that made my stomach heave. His head whipped back, snapping against the ground. His injured leg, already damaged, already hurting, bent at an angle legs aren't meant to bend. The BMW screeched to a halt 15 feet past where Blaze's body finally stopped moving. Silence fell like a physical weight. The car alarm cut off mid-blare, as if even the machine couldn't bear to make noise in the wake of what had just happened. The crowd stood frozen, phones still raised but forgotten, recording a tragedy no one wanted to watch. Officer Beeler's radio crackled with static, the dispatcher's voice asking for status. He didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Just stood there staring at the crumpled form bleeding on the pavement. Then Julia screamed, not the sharp scream from before. This was something primal, torn from depths I didn't know existed in a 90-year-old frame. This was grief and terror and love condensed into a sound that broke something fundamental in everyone who heard it. "Blaze!" she crawled. Couldn't walk, couldn't run, so she crawled on her hands and knees across concrete that tore through her stockings and shredded the skin beneath. Blood bloomed on her palms where she caught herself, but she didn't slow, didn't stop. Just dragged herself forward with a mother's desperation toward the child who'd taken the blow meant for her. "Blaze, baby, no, 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 stay with me, stay with me. Don't you dare, don't you?" She reached him and collapsed across his body, her weathered hands finding his face, his neck, his chest, searching for breath, for a heartbeat, for any sign that this wasn't the ending, couldn't be the ending, not like this. Blaze's eyes were open, just barely, unfocused and glazed with pain, but open. His tail moved. Once, a single weak thump against the asphalt. Not a wag, a communication, the only one he had left. "I'm here, I'm still here. I kept you safe." Julia buried her face in his neck, in the scarred fur she'd been stroking for 3 years, and sobbed like the world was ending. Maybe it was. Christina finally moved, running forward. Her phone already out and dialing. "I need an ambulance, corner of Wilshire, and oh God, we need a veterinary trauma team too. Right now, right now." Officer Beeler dropped to his knees beside them, his training kicking in despite the shock written across his face. His hands moved over Blaze's body with careful precision, checking for breaks, for bleeding, for damage that could be stabilized before help arrived. "He's breathing," Beeler said quietly. "Pulse is thready but present. Possible internal injuries, definite fractures. Ma'am, Julia, can you hear me? We need to not move him." But Julia wasn't listening, couldn't hear anything over the sound of her own breaking heart. She just kept whispering into Blaze's ear, the same words over and over, the mantra that had saved him once before. "You're safe. You're safe with me, my good boy. My brave, perfect boy. Stay with me. Please stay with me." The crowd remained frozen, silent witnesses to a love story written in scars and sacrifice, ending on a sun-bleached street in the middle of an ordinary Friday afternoon. In the distance, new sirens began to wail, but they sounded like they were coming from another world entirely. The veterinary emergency team arrived in 7 minutes. It felt like 7 hours. They came in a modified ambulance with "Animal Urgent Care" emblazoned on the side in bold letters, a service I didn't even know existed until two women in scrubs erupted from the vehicle with a collapsible stretcher and a trauma kit that looked like it belonged in a war zone. The lead vet, Dr. Sarah Patel, according to her name tag, took one look at Blaze's crumpled form and started barking orders. IV line, oxygen, immobilization collar. She worked with the focused precision of someone who'd seen too many animals on the wrong end of human mistakes. Possible spinal involvement, she said to her partner, a younger woman whose hands moved like lightning despite the tremor in her voice. Pelvic fractures, definitely. That left hindquarter. Compound, maybe. Get me 2 milligrams of morphine, now. Julia refused to move. She'd folded herself around Blaze's upper body like a shield, her face pressed against his scarred neck, her hands cradling his massive head with a tenderness that made my throat close. "Ma'am, we need space to work," Dr. Patel said, not unkindly. "Please, if you want us to save him." "I won't leave him." Julia's voice came out muffled against Blaze's fur. "He can't wake up alone. He can't think I left him." Officer Beeler crouched beside them, his earlier authority tempered into something gentler. "Julia, they need room. I'll stay with you, right here. I promise he won't be alone." Something in his tone, the way he said her name, the weight of his promise, penetrated Julia's grief. She pulled back slowly, her face streaked with tears and blood from where she'd scraped it against the concrete. Christina helped her to her feet, held her upright when her legs threatened to give out. The paramedics swarmed over Blaze. Needles, bandages, hands checking vitals with practiced efficiency. Blaze didn't even flinch when the IV went in. Too far gone into shock or too focused on Julia's voice, still murmuring reassurances from 3 feet away. Officer Beeler guided Julia to sit on the curb. She moved like a puppet with cut strings, collapsing more than sitting, her eyes never leaving the team working frantically on the dog who'd saved her life. "Mrs. Huggins," Beeler said quietly, settling beside her with the careful movements of someone whose knees had been complaining for a decade. "I need to understand what happened here today. All of it. From the beginning." Julia's laugh came out, wet and broken. "From the beginning? Officer, I'm not sure I even remember the beginning anymore. It feels like another lifetime." "Try," he said simply. She was quiet for a long moment, watching Dr. Patel insert a catheter into Blaze's front leg, watching his chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. When she finally spoke, her voice had the quality of someone reciting from memory, a story told so many times it had worn grooves into her consciousness. 3 years ago, I volunteered with the county animal control. Just administrative work mostly, filing, answering phones, making coffee. I was 67 and newly widowed, and the house was too quiet without Harold. She paused, her fingers twisting in her lap. They brought Blaze in on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always slow. And then suddenly there were trucks and officers and dogs in cages that looked more like prisoners than animals. Christina had moved closer, listening with the intensity of someone who'd only heard pieces of the story through official channels and second-hand accounts. "The Riverside Ring," Julia continued. 17 dogs. Most of them were destroyed within 48 hours. Too aggressive, they said. Too damaged. Too dangerous to ever trust again. Her voice hardened slightly. Blaze was scheduled for euthanasia at 8 a.m. on Friday. I found out Thursday afternoon. Officer Beeler's expression remained neutral, but I saw his hand tighten on his knee. What made him different? Why him? "He wasn't different," Julia said simply. None of them were. They were all victims. But Blaze was the evidence dog, the one they documented most thoroughly, the one whose scars and injuries had been photographed and cataloged for the prosecution. He'd served his purpose. He'd helped put monsters in prison, and his reward was a needle and an unmarked grave. She wiped at her face with a trembling hand. I asked if I could foster him. Just temporarily, I said, just until they could find a proper sanctuary. They laughed at me. Actually, I laughed, said I was too old, that he was too dangerous, that I'd be killed within a week. But you took him anyway, Christina said softly. I forged a signature, Julia admitted, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. Harold had taught me that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same thing. I took Blaze home on Friday morning, 2 hours before his scheduled execution. Dr. Patel looked up from her work. We need to transport, now. He's stable enough to move, but he needs surgery within the hour. Wait. Julia started to rise. Keep talking, Beeler said, his hand on her shoulder keeping her seated but gentle. They'll stabilize him. You finish the story. Julia's eyes followed the team as they carefully maneuvered Blaze onto the stretcher, his body immobilized with straps and foam blocks. The threats started 3 days later. Phone calls at 2 a.m., messages left on my doorstep, people from the ring, people who blamed me for the arrests, people who wanted revenge. What kind of threats? Beeler's voice had gone cold. The usual kind, I imagine. They'd kill me, burn down my house, make me watch while they torture Blaze before finishing us both. She said it calmly, like she was reciting a grocery list. Someone spray-painted dog killer across my garage door, broke my living room window, slashed all 4 of my tires one night. Christina made a sound like she'd been punched. Julia, why didn't you? The police could have. I filed reports, Julia interrupted. 8 of them. Nothing ever came of it. The ring's associates were careful. No cameras, no witnesses, no proof. She paused. My daughter called me every day begging me to give Blaze to a sanctuary. My son threatened to have me declared incompetent. My neighbors stopped speaking to me. The pharmacy where I'd gotten my prescriptions for 20 years asked me not to come back because I made other customers uncomfortable. Jesus, Beeler breathed. But Blaze was healing, Julia continued, her voice strengthening slightly. Slowly, so slowly. He wouldn't eat for the first week. I won't sleep. Just sat in the corner of my guest room shaking. But I sat with him, every night. Just sat there reading books out loud until my voice gave out. Her eyes had gone distant, remembering. After 3 weeks, he ate from my hand. After 2 months, he let me touch his scars without flinching. After 6 months, I heard him play. Actually play, like a puppy, even though he was already 5 years old. The ambulance doors slammed shut on Blaze's stretcher. The engine roared to life. He gave me a reason to wake up, Julia said quietly. After Harold died, I just existed, went through motions, waited for it to be over. But Blaze needed me, really needed me. For the first time in years, someone needed me to stay alive. She finally looked at Officer Beeler, tears streaming freely. So yes, I walk him even though I'm 90 and can barely make it around the block. Yes, I bring him out even though people stare and judge and cross the street to avoid us. Because he spent his entire life being told he was worthless, and I'll be damned if I let him believe that in whatever time he has left. Silence fell over the small group. Even the dispersing crowd seemed to have fallen quiet. shame settling over the scene like fog. Christina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The cancer diagnosis? 2 months ago, Julia confirmed. Osteosarcoma in his pelvis and spine. The vet said surgery wasn't an option at his age with his history of injuries. Palliative care only, 3 to 4 months, maybe less. Her voice broke completely. I just wanted him to have some normal days, some sunlight, some dignity. Officer Beeler stood slowly, his face carved from stone. He looked at the dissipating crowd, at the phone cameras being tucked away, at the evidence of judgment and cruelty written across an afternoon that should have been ordinary. Mrs. Huggins, he said formally, you're not in any trouble. You understand that. What happened here today? He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. Your dog saved your life, and you've been saving him for 3 years. Dr. Patel appeared at Julia's side, her expression grave. He's alive, critical but alive. We're taking him to the trauma center in Santa Monica. If you want to ride along. Julia was already moving, Christina supporting her weight. Officer Beeler clearing a path through what remained of the crowd. In the fading afternoon light, blood still stained the asphalt where Blaze had fallen, where love had chosen sacrifice, where a dog trained to kill had decided to save instead. The video hit social media before Blaze came out of surgery. Someone in the crowd, I never found out who, had captured the moment. The BMW launching forward. Blaze's impossible choice. Julia's scream echoing off the buildings. 17 seconds of footage that would be viewed 42 million times in the first 72 hours. The comment sections became battlegrounds. This is why Pitbull should be banned, ticking time bombs. Did you even watch the video? That dog saved her. Trained fighting dog in public spaces, Daquanon lawsuit waiting to happen. I'm literally crying. That's the purest love I've ever seen. The Animal Welfare Center where Julia had fostered Blaze received 600 calls in one day. Half demanded they revoke her fostering license. Half demanded they give her an award. 3 news vans parked outside the Santa Monica Veterinary Trauma Center before midnight. Their satellite dishes pointed skyward like accusing fingers. I found out about all of it later from Christina, who'd stationed herself in the surgical waiting room like a guardian at the gates. She'd been there when the reporters started arriving, when the producers started calling, when the feeding frenzy began in earnest. They wanted the sensational story, Christina told me when I visited on day 2, bringing coffee and answers to questions I'd been replaying in my mind since the accident. The dangerous dog, the irresponsible owner, the tragedy waiting to happen. They wanted villains and victims and a narrative that fit in a 3-minute segment. But they didn't get it, I said. No, Christina agreed, a small smile flickering across her exhausted face. They got Dorothy McDade instead. Dorothy McDade arrived at the trauma center on Saturday morning, 48 hours after the incident. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut short and sharp, wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. No camera crew, no sound guy, just a battered leather messenger bag and eyes that had spent decades looking past surfaces to find truth underneath. I'm with the Long Beach Independent, she'd told the receptionist, her voice carrying none of the aggressive energy of the TV reporters camped outside. I'm here to speak with Julia Huggins, if she'll have me. Christina had been skeptical. Another journalist meant another opportunity for Julia's story to be twisted, for Blaze's sacrifice to be weaponized in service of whatever narrative sold papers that week. But Dorothy wasn't interested in what sold. I've been covering animal welfare stories for 30 years, she'd told Christina quietly while waiting for Julia to decide whether to grant an interview. I was at the Riverside ring bust. I saw those dogs. I know what they went through. She paused, her fingers tightening on her bag strap. And I know the difference between a monster and a victim. If Mrs. Huggins will talk to me, I promise, I'll tell it right. Julia, sedated and exhausted in the chair beside Blaze's recovery kennel, had agreed to 15 minutes. They talked for 3 hours. The article dropped on Monday morning. Not on the front page. Dorothy had insisted it run in the features section where there was room for nuance, for complexity, for the kind of storytelling that didn't fit in sound bites. The quiet heroism of Julia Huggins, how love rewrote a fighting dog's ending. Dorothy didn't bury the truth. She included Blaze's history, the ring he'd come from, the scars he carried. She included the threats Julia had faced, the isolation, the vandalism, the daughter who'd stopped calling, the son who'd threatened legal action. But she also included the other parts, the 3 a.m. vigils when Blaze couldn't sleep, the way Julia had learned to read his triggers, his fears, his tiny moments of joy, the arthritis in her hands that made holding a leash agony. But she held it anyway. The social security checks that went to veterinary bills instead of her own medication. Julia Huggins didn't save Blaze because it was easy, Dorothy wrote in the closing paragraph. She saved him because it was right, and in doing so, she gave him something the fighting ring never could, a reason to choose love over violence, even when violence would have been justified. Last Friday, on a sun-bleached street corner, Blaze returned that gift, and the world is better for both of them. The article went viral in a different way than the video had, slower, deeper, shared not by rage scrollers looking for outrage, but by people who read to the end and found themselves quietly crying in their desks. The donations started within hours. Small amounts at first, $20, $50. A note attached to one early donation read simply, "For Blaze's medical bills and for Julia's courage." Then larger amounts. A veterinary clinic in Portland offered free follow-up care. A pet supply company sent a year's worth of specialty food for senior dogs with medical conditions. A law firm in San Francisco offered pro bono representation if anyone tried to sue Julia or have Blaze seized. By Wednesday, the fund Christina had hastily set up, medical support for Blaze and Julia, had reached $47,000. By Friday, it had topped $200,000. And on Saturday evening, exactly 1 week after the accident, a woman in an expensive suit appeared in the trauma center waiting room, asking to speak with Julia privately. Felicia Sanders. The name hadn't meant anything to me, but Christina's sharp intake of breath suggested it should have. "She was there," Christina whispered, "in the crowd. I remember her face." Felicia had watched the whole thing unfold, had filmed the initial moments before realizing what she was witnessing wasn't entertainment but transformation. She deleted the video immediately, but the images had stayed with her, playing on repeat every time she closed her eyes. "I can't stop thinking about them," Felicia told Julia quietly, sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs while Blaze slept in his kennel 6 feet away. "About what you've given up, about what he gave for you." She didn't say what she did for a living, didn't mention the tech company she'd founded, or the fortune she'd built, or the charitable foundation that bore her name. She just asked a simple question. What would help? Really help? Not for the cameras, not for the story. What do you need? Julia had been silent for a long moment. Then, A place where he can see the ocean when he's ready. Somewhere quiet, where people don't stare. Felicia nodded once. Consider it done. On day 9, Dr. Patel finally gave permission for Julia to enter Blaze's recovery area. He was awake, barely. His hindquarters were wrapped in bandages and immobilized with a complex brace system. An IV dripped fluids into his front leg. His eyes were glazed with pain medication, unfocused and distant. But when Julia lowered herself carefully to the floor beside his kennel, when her weathered hand reached through the bars to touch his scarred face, those eyes focused. "Hey, baby," Julia whispered, her voice cracking. "Hey, my brave boy. My perfect, beautiful boy." Blaze's tail moved, just once, a single weak thump against the padded floor. Julia pressed her forehead against the kennel bars, her tears falling silently into Blaze's fur. "You saved me," she breathed. "You saved me, and I couldn't save you from this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." But Blaze wasn't asking for apologies. His eyes had already drifted closed again, his breathing evening out into the rhythm of medicated sleep. And on his face, battered, scarred, broken but healing, was something I'd never seen there before. Peace, the kind that comes not from an absence of pain, but from the presence of love that makes pain bearable. Julia stayed on that floor for 2 hours, her hand never leaving his face, whispering stories about the ocean house Felicia was arranging, about the sunshine and the sound of waves, about all the quiet, gentle days still waiting for them on the other side of healing. In the doorway, Christina and I watched in silence. Some stories don't have happy endings, but this one, against all odds, might have a gentle one. The ocean house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, exactly as Felicia Sanders had promised. Wide windows, wheelchair-accessible ramps, a covered porch where an elderly woman and her broken dog could sit and watch the waves without stares or judgment or cameras pointing at their grief. Julia and Blaze moved in on a Tuesday in late November, 3 months after the accident. He was walking again, limping badly, the brace still necessary, but walking. The cancer had spread despite the surgery, creeping through his spine like poison ivy through a garden fence. Dr. Patel had been frank about the timeline. "Weeks," she'd said quietly. "Maybe a month if we're lucky." "I'm sorry," but Julia hadn't cried at the prognosis. She'd simply nodded, as if she'd known all along that borrowed time always came due eventually. What no one had anticipated was that Julia's time was running out faster than Blaze's. The first sign came 3 weeks into their stay at the ocean house. Julia woke one morning and couldn't remember where she'd put her glasses. Then I couldn't remember what day it was. Then looked at Blaze sleeping on the orthopedic bed beside her own, and her face went blank with confusion. "Who?" she'd started to ask Christina, who'd been staying in the guest room to help with daily care. The moment passed. Recognition flooded back. Julia laughed it off as old age playing tricks. But the tricks came more frequently after that. The doctor Christina called, a concierge physician who made house calls, ran tests, ordered scans, delivered a diagnosis in the gentle, measured tone reserved for news that can't be softened no matter how carefully you choose the words. Stroke. A small one probably happened weeks ago without anyone noticing. But there's evidence of vascular dementia. Advanced. It's progressing quickly. How quickly? Christina had asked. The doctor's silence was enough. Blaze knew before any of us did. Dogs understand death. They smell it coming, sense it changes too subtle for human perception. Blaze had spent his early years surrounded by it, had learned its particular scent in cages where animals went to sleep and never woke. He started following Julia everywhere she went, not protectively the way he had on the street that day. This was different. This was a vigil. He'd position himself wherever she was sitting, his head resting on her lap or her foot, his eyes tracking her every breath as if he could hold her to life through sheer force of devotion. When Julia's walks around the porch grew shorter, Blaze didn't pull toward the railing to watch the ocean. He sat beside her chair instead, patient, present, waiting. When she stopped being able to tell Christina who she was, when the confusion stretched from minutes to hours to entire days, Blaze never left her side. "He know," Christina told me during one of my visits, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He knows she's leaving, and he's saying goodbye, in the only way he can." Julia's lucid moments became precious and rare, like finding whole seashells on a beach of fragments. On a Thursday afternoon in mid-December, she woke from a nap with clarity in her eyes that hadn't been there for days. Blaze was lying beside her bed, his massive head resting on the mattress near her hand. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his scarred ear. "Blaze," she whispered, "my good boy." His tail thumped once, twice, a weak rhythm of recognition and relief. "I'm sorry," Julia continued, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you longer. I'm sorry I'm leaving first. That's not how this was supposed to work." Blaze shifted closer, pressing his muzzle into her palm, a gesture they'd shared 1,000 times. Comfort given and received in equal measure. "You were never broken," Julia said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Do you understand that? They tried to break you, but they failed. You were always whole, always good, always worthy of love." She paused, struggling for breath, for words, for time that was slipping away like sand through arthritic fingers. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for teaching an old woman that courage looks like fear that keeps going anyway." Blaze's eyes, those amber eyes that had seen hell and heaven and everything between, held hers with perfect understanding. He didn't need translation, didn't need words to know what she was saying, what she'd been saying every day for 3 years. "I love you. I love you. I will love you past the end of everything." Julia's fingers worked through his fur one last time, tracing the scars she'd memorized like prayers. Then her hand went still. Her breathing evened out. She slept. Julia Huggins passed away at 3:47 a.m. on December 18th, with Christina holding one hand and Blaze's head resting on her chest, rising and falling with breaths that grew further apart until they stopped altogether. Christina called the hospice nurse, made the arrangements, did all the things practical people do when death arrives on schedule. But Blaze didn't move. He stayed on that bed, his weight pressed against Julia's side, his eyes open and watchful, as if waiting for her to wake up and tell him it was time for breakfast, time to sit on the porch, time for one more quiet hour watching the ocean together. "Blaze," Christina said gently, her voice destroyed by crying. "Baby, she's gone. You need to let them. We need to let them take her." But Blaze just looked at her with those ancient eyes and stayed exactly where he was. It took 3 hours before he finally moved. Not because anyone forced him, not because he'd accepted it, but because somewhere in the mystery of animal understanding, he'd completed whatever goodbye he needed to give. He climbed down from the bed carefully, his injured leg dragging slightly, and walked to the front door, where he sat and waited. Julia's funeral was small, held in the garden of a church she hadn't attended in years, but that agreed to host because Dorothy McDade's article had made refusing impossible. 18 people came. Christina, Dorothy, Officer Beeler in his dress uniform, Felicia Sanders, Dr. Patel, a handful of others whose lives had been changed by 17 seconds of video and 3 years of quiet sacrifice. Julia's daughter didn't attend. Her son sent flowers with no card. Blaze wasn't at the service. Christina had worried the crowds and noise would be too much for him. But back at the Ocean House, while they were lowering Julia's casket into ground that would hold her until the earth itself forgot, Blaze stood and walked to the door. He sat there for 4 hours, waiting for a woman who was never coming home. When Christina finally returned, exhausted and hollowed out by grief, she found him in the same position. She knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around his scarred neck, and cried into his fur until she had nothing left. "She loved you," Christina whispered, "until her very last breath. She loved you." Blaze's tail moved. Once, a single acknowledgement. Then he lowered his head to his paws and closed his eyes. And in the fading December light, with the ocean crashing against rocks that had stood for millennia, a dog who'd been taught to kill finally allowed himself to rest. The vigil was over. Love had seen them both home. The sanctuary wasn't what I'd imagined when Christina first told me about it. I'd pictured cages, maybe, clinical spaces with concrete floors and fluorescent lights humming overhead. The kind of place where broken things went to wait out their remaining days in quiet, institutional dignity. Instead, Felicia Sanders had built something closer to a dream. 3 acres of coastal land overlooking the Pacific, with rolling grass and wind-bent cypress trees and pathways wide enough for dogs who didn't walk straight anymore. Individual cottages instead of kennels, small structures with glass walls and heated floors, and beds soft enough for bodies that had earned their rest. The whole place felt less like a sanctuary and more like what heaven might look like if it were designed specifically for souls that had suffered too long on earth. Blaze arrived on a gray January morning, 6 weeks after Julia's funeral. Christina drove him in her own car, taking the curves slowly, talking to him the whole way the way Julia used to. Quiet reassurances that nobody was asking him to be anything but what he was. The sanctuary director, a woman named Maria Chen, who'd spent 2 decades rehabilitating traumatized animals, met them at the gate. She didn't approach Blaze directly, didn't make the mistakes people so often made with dogs who'd learned that humans were unpredictable and dangerous. She just opened the cottage door and stepped back. "Take your time," she told Christina. "He'll know when he's ready." It took 20 minutes before Blaze limped inside, another hour before he explored beyond the front room. By evening, he'd settled on the oversized dog bed positioned directly in front of the floor-to-ceiling window that faced not the ocean, but the access road leading back to the highway, back toward the city, back toward the street where everything had changed. "He sits there every afternoon," Maria told me 3 weeks later when I visited for the first time. "Same spot, same position, watching the road like he's expecting someone." We both knew who he was expecting. We both knew she wasn't coming. The memorial plaque went up on Wilshire Boulevard in March, installed on the streetlight pole where Julia had collapsed after Blaze took the hit meant for her. Officer Donald Beeler had pushed for it, navigating bureaucracy and permits with the stubborn determination of someone who'd seen something worth remembering. The plaque was simple, brushed bronze, no flowery language. In memory of Julia Huggins, 1933-2024, and her devoted companion Blaze. On this spot, love proved stronger than fear, and courage wore the face of an unlikely hero. May we judge less quickly and love more fiercely. The dedication ceremony drew a larger crowd than Julia's funeral had. Dorothy McDade covered it for The Independent, her photographer capturing the moment Officer Beeler touched the plaque with his fingertips, his jaw tight with emotion he wasn't quite able to hide. "She taught me something," Beeler said when Dorothy asked him to comment for the article. "In 32 years of police work, I thought I'd seen everything. Thought I knew how to read situations, how to assess threats." He paused, looking at the crosswalk where it had all happened. "But Julia and Blaze, they reminded me that the most dangerous thing in any situation is our own certainty, our own assumptions, the stories we tell ourselves before we bother to learn the truth." Christina had been there, standing at the edge of the crowd with tears streaming down her face. She visited Blaze twice a week now, sitting with him in his cottage, telling him about her day, about the people who still asked about him, about Julia's daughter who'd finally called, 6 months too late, to say she was sorry. "He doesn't wag his tail much anymore," Christina told me after one visit, "but he listens. And sometimes, when I tell him stories about Julia, about the good days, the peaceful ones, his eyes soften, like he's remembering too." Dorothy's final piece on Julia and Blaze ran on the first anniversary of the accident. Not in the feature section this time. The editor had insisted it run on the front page, above the fold, where stories that mattered lived. 1 year later, The Street That Remembers, Lessons in Love from an Unlikely Pair. She'd interviewed everyone: Officer Beeler, Dr. Patel, Felicia Sanders, Maria Chen, even tracked down some of the witnesses from that day, the ones who'd screamed for police, who'd filmed with shaking hands, who'd expected violence and received a master class in sacrifice instead. "I was wrong," one man admitted in the article, his name withheld at his request. "I was so sure that dog was going to attack, so certain I was about to witness a tragedy. And I was, just not the tragedy I'd imagined. The real tragedy was how quickly I judged, how fast I condemned something I didn't understand." Dorothy's writing had lost none of its power in the years since her first article. If anything, time had sharpened her perspective, given her distance to see patterns others might miss. "We live in an age of instant judgment," she wrote in the closing section, "of 30-second videos and hot takes and certainty worn like armor against complexity. We see a Pitbull and we know the story. We see an elderly woman and we know her limitations. We see scars and we know violence. But Julia Huggins knew something we're all in danger of forgetting. That broken things aren't useless things. That fear and aggression aren't the same. That love, real love, the kind that costs everything and asks nothing, can rewrite endings that everyone assumed were inevitable." Blaze was trained to kill, conditioned to see threats everywhere, to respond to fear with violence, to survive at any cost. But when the moment came, when every instinct screamed at him to save himself, he chose differently. Not because the training was gone, but because love proved stronger than conditioning. Julia gave him 3 years of peace, and in return, Blaze gave her something most of us never find. Proof that redemption isn't a fantasy, that healing is possible even for souls everyone else has given up on. That courage looks like a trembling dog standing between traffic and the woman who taught him what kindness means. The article ended with a photo taken just weeks before Julia died. She was sitting on the porch of the ocean house, her hand resting on Blaze's scarred head, both of them watching the sunset. Their faces were turned slightly toward each other, not looking directly, just aware, connected. Two beings who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided that together was better than alone. I visited Blaze on a Tuesday in late April, bringing nothing but time and a willingness to sit in silence if that's what he needed. Maria let me into his cottage without ceremony. "He's having a good day," she said quietly, alert, present. Yesterday was harder. We both knew what harder meant. The cancer was winning, had been winning since long before Julia died. Dr. Patel visited weekly now, adjusting medications, managing pain, preparing everyone for an ending that was no longer a question of if, but when. Blaze was at his window as always. Lying down today, his head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on the access road with the patience of something that had learned to wait. I sat on the floor beside him, not touching, just present. "She's not coming, buddy," I said softly. "I'm sorry, I wish she was. But she's not." Blaze's ear twitched, acknowledgement without agreement. "But she loved you," I continued, "until her last breath. And everyone who saw what you did that day, everyone who really saw it, they understand now. What you are, what you've always been." His tail moved, just once, a single weak thump against the floor. Not happiness, not hope, just recognition of truth spoken aloud, of a story finally told right. I stayed for an hour, sitting in comfortable silence while the afternoon sun painted the cottage walls gold. When I finally stood to leave, I paused at the door and looked back. Blaze hadn't moved. Was still watching the road, still waiting with the faithful patience of something that understood love didn't end just because breathing did. "She's proud of you," I said. "Wherever she is. She's so damn proud." Blaze passed away on a Saturday morning in June, with Maria holding his head and Christina whispering the same words Julia had spoken 3 years earlier in a county shelter when everyone else had given up. "You're safe. You're safe with me. My good boy. My brave, perfect boy." They buried him on the sanctuary grounds under a cypress tree that had been bent by decades of ocean wind but never broken. The headstone was simple: Blaze teacher, protector, proof. On Wilshire Boulevard, fresh flowers appeared at the base of the memorial plaque. They still appear sometimes, left by strangers who read Dorothy's articles, or saw the video, or just heard the story and needed to mark it somehow. To say they understood, to acknowledge that something important happened on that street, something worth remembering, fear judged wrongly, loyalty misunderstood, love remembered, and in the end, that's all any of us can hope for, to be seen truly, loved fiercely, and remembered well by the souls we chose to protect, even when protection cost us everything. The street remembers. We all should.